back to where you sort of got started with this, because there's some wonderful stories about, being very frustrated at just, like, before you could do your work, you had to get the data. And I think so many things in life have that quality to them. Like I'm working on building some software, and before you can build any software, you have to build the security thing, right? Before you can, become a fashion designer, you have to study, stitching. I mean, there's all this. Right. And you talk about being really frustrated with what that was at the time. And then the phrase you use is coding your way out.
Yeah. So I was always and I say this term proudly, I was always a computer nerd. Like I grew up in a time when you probably didn't have a computer for a while at home. You had to go use the Tandy TRS-80 in your school computer lab. Ultimately, when I was kind of in high school, and like towards the end of grade school, is when people started having computers at home, and it was like, oh, you really wanted to go over to the person's house after school who had the coolest computer, because you could code on that and play games and tear it apart, do all kinds of interesting things. And so at every point in my life, honestly, still today, it's like, oh, is this something that I have an excuse to write a program for, write some code for? And it's usually for fun, but it's also a professional reaction to things. And it started back when I was at Columbia, and I literally had this project, which was ultimately a precursor. And I don't mean this in a way where I want any credit for it, but it was kind of the way people think about liquid biopsies today. So we were taking the blood from prostate cancer patients and trying to figure out what the best course of therapy was for them by performing a molecular assay on their blood. Basically, could I not detect very specific mutations in their cancer and try to stage it or categorize it that way, but like literally, are there prostate cells in this guy's blood? So it's a guy. And if there are, that means something, because either that patient has a metastasis or has the potential for that to happen at any moment. So if we take out their prostate, that might not be curative. So long story short, I'm doing this molecular assay. I'm literally doing the work. So I'm running around the hospital to get blood from patients, and I'm putting it in the freezer behind me, and I'm taking out tube after tube and spinning out all the cells and extracting the messenger RNA and running it through gels and taking pictures of the results and blah, blah, blah. And all of this is winding up in my lab notebook, which literally on its own is not interesting information unless you were trying to figure out how many times I could do this assay over and over again. I guess you could plot, Glen's performance in assay production. But to actually make the results of that at all interesting, right, to figure out if there was anything that was predictive about this, you had to match up the results of that assay to what we knew about the patient from other dimensions. Again, this goes all back to this thinking in like the n-dimensional space. So we knew what the patient's pathology report looked like. We knew what their blood chemistry looked like. If there was, probably anybody who works in prostate cancer, or hopefully you haven't, but it knows somebody knows what PSA is like. Can we look at their PSA? Can we look at all of their medical history and add this assay that we were doing at Columbia at the time? And once you add that assay, do you have any more predictive power? Well, predictive power for what? For what the outcome was when this patient had their surgery or whatever the modality was that they used for whatever intervention. And then, so I had to get data later about them in the future. Here I was in the lab bench, connected to nothing. So I was constantly on a quest to literally get sometimes to medical charts, like to figure out what physician at Columbia saw this patient and go over to their office and make sure I've got all the right people who, aren't going to kick me out because I'm looking through the chart and copying.
This is 94, 96 kind of time.
This, yeah, 94.
So
95.
right around there, just to put this in people's minds, because we all forget, right, that back then how you got on the internet was you had a modem and it went,
Yeah, we had an internet line in the back of our lab that went to a Windows 95 PC at one point after I had arrived. We all shared. And so I was like transcribing things from the charts, and then I had to go to different buildings to get on different hospital systems to get pathology reports and to get test results and surgical reports. And by the way, it's 25 years later, and that still is like that. You still have to go to different systems and hospitals to get this information and consolidate it all. And it was just super frustrating and boring and slow. And it was just like why can I not code my way out of this problem? This is all information that's connected to computers. I love computers. There's this thing called the internet, and like apparently I can go buy a book. And I would say to people, like, you're talking about like, remember what time it was? I always use like the only thing you could buy on Amazon at this point in the time frame of humanity was a book. That was all. There were just books.
That was July of 1999.
Before that, right? And so it just, if we can do that online, if people logged on, I don't know how quickly people came into the room after you opened it. Like we were joking about, like, we can put people on the moon, but we can't, stop robocalls. Like we can buy a book online. Why am I walking across the street to consolidate data and doing it all by hand? And that was really the beginning of Medidata.